Imagine you woke up one day with complete amnesia. No name, no personal history, no beliefs about who or what you are. How would you define yourself? Who would you be? See, normally each of us has a story that tells us who we are, where we belong, why we're doing what we're doing. For example, hi, I'm Andrew, I'm 29, I live in Washington State, I make YouTube videos and I coach. We almost always define and describe ourselves exclusively via our stories. But here's the thing. You're not actually a story. And that's where the problem comes in. Because we often live as if we are our story. Our past trauma, our past wounds, the things that have happened to us that have formed limiting beliefs about our capabilities exist in a sort of story that shapes what we see as possible for somebody like us. To make things worse, these stories that we follow are often formed very early in our lives, when circumstances may be vastly different from the way they are right now. But our stories are not us. Just like this is not an apple. The word apple, or the image of an apple, is a pointer, but it is not the real thing. And now you might think, all right, Andrew, come on, man, we're getting a little lost in the semantics here. But that's actually exactly the point, is that the real world is not semantics. When we're out in nature, it's very clear that a map is not the actual forest. It is an extremely useful tool, but nothing more. Stories provide us with identity, belonging, meaning. They tell us who our friends and family are, what we should do, what type of person we are, what type of person we can be. These stories, these maps that we use to describe and define ourselves are incredibly useful tools. But they're not really us. This introduces a problem into the equation, because maps are supposed to be based on reality, not the other way around. This is why people self-sabotage, why they stay in toxic relationships, why they don't believe in themselves, why they do things that are self-destructive. Because mentally, they are following a map that says, go this way. We are not seeing reality as it is. We are seeing reality through the veil of who we are. We begin to live out patterns and do things that are sort of, from an objective standpoint, ridiculous, because our personal maps, formed out of trauma and limiting beliefs years ago, are telling us that this is the right way for somebody like us to go. And from everybody else's perspective, it looks like Michael from The Office driving his car into a lake because the GPS told him to.
The machine knows! Stop yelling at me! No, it's up here!
But the fear of admitting that that old map is not right is terrifying. After all, imagine you're hiking in the woods one day and you start to get off track and you find yourself lost. Most people, if you have a map, are going to keep following the map, under the assumption that they did something wrong and the map was right. And this is what binds us to those stories, to those ideas, those maps. It's because they seem to provide us with a framework to make sense of everything, where we belong, who we came from, who we're supposed to be. These things feel like they give us a lot of security, but actually they're just conceptual, and that's okay most of the time. We need a framework with which to exist in the world. I need a name to say, hey, I'm Andrew. If I just say, well, who am I really? That's not very useful. But we cannot mistake that framework for reality, just like we cannot mistake ourselves for our idea of ourselves. When these stories become so heavily ingrained in who we believe we are and how we see the world, we start to become almost like actors, just reading a script. And most of the time we are doing this with stories and beliefs we have not even consciously chosen. Who wrote your script? Did you write it? Was it just always there? Who told you you had to be a certain way? Who told you this was your place, this was your job, this was your role? Who told you you couldn't push past your boundaries, be something different? Who told you you couldn't be creative or artistic or weren't good at something? Who told you you were bad or good or whatever? That 30 years later still exist in your mind as a map, as a story that shapes the way you see the world. And did you agree to live by those rules? Do you still agree? Are you choosing in this moment to continue living that story as if it were fact? One of my favorite books as a little kid was called Goodnight Opus, and it starts with Opus the penguin being read a goodnight story by, I think it's his grandma, and she reads him Goodnight Moon. And eventually she dozes off and he departs the text. That is to say, he imagines a different version of this same old story. I think that's the gift that life presents us, is we have the text, the written story that we've been through many times. We know our role, we know who we are, we know where we belong, and it feels real. But it's a story, and we have the ability to depart the text, to write the next page, to write the next chapter, and have it be a sudden twist. Wow, didn't see that coming. Stories, by their very nature, are always old. And in many cases, this is useful. It gives us a great framework for understanding the world, how things operate. But crucially, we need to continue to update our idea of ourselves. Many of us, including, myself from time to time, I'm a work in progress, we live small, scared lives where we cling to the known. We cling to that sliver of identification with our limitations. Saying, well, I'm not good, I can't, blah, 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 blah. And those stories give us a comfort zone. They give us something we can hold on to and say, well, this is my box. I live in this box. Maybe I don't love it here, but at least I know I'm not gonna die. And then we cling to that box, even when it becomes suffocating. Just like an animal that sheds its skin or its shell or metamorphosizes. There's a period of intense vulnerability and fear that has to be gone through when we admit that our current identity is too small, too restricting. It's offered us a certain level of protection, but we need to grow. We need to expand. We need to take some parts of our old story, our old shell, which once gave us security and meaning and belonging, and say, this is just an old story I'm dragging around. And the essence of who I am needs to expand beyond this. So I have to put this down, even though it feels terrifying, even though it feels very vulnerable. Because life is full of beautiful, amazing things and terrifying things that both exist in that unknown space. New challenges that will seem insurmountable, but can be overcome. New gifts and beautiful things we never thought would be possible. Both of these weren't possible from the perspective of that tiny sliver of the known, from our current map, our current story, because they are chapters that have yet to be written. And the way forward is to see that you are no longer bound by the story. In fact, you never really were. You just thought you were. And to give yourself some grace, some acceptance, some love even. When your story says you don't deserve that, you screwed it all up, you messed it all up, blah, 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 to say no! That way of thinking is just another part of that story that serves no purpose except to reinforce this negative cycle and keeps us firmly embedded in that small shell. The true freedom we always have in life is to expand our idea of ourselves, of how big we can be, of how wholehearted and authentic we can be. And we have the ability, like Opus, to depart the text, to write a new chapter. I want to leave you a story from Anthony DeMello, one of my favorite spiritual teachers. There's a group of tourists on a bus crossing the country. They're all arguing who has the best seat. Who, I want to sit there. No, I want to sit here. Oh, and they're fighting over it. Who's the best looking person? Who's the most attractive, most successful person on this bus? And they're so busy arguing and fighting and dealing with their status that they get to the end of the trip and they realize nobody ever looked out the window. Nobody saw the journey. I think the gift life gives us every single moment is to stop arguing for a second and to look out the window. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.